Airports are loud, busy places, strangers rushing past each other, eyes glued to their phones. No one stopping long enough to notice the quiet man in the corner of the security line. But on that humid afternoon in Atlanta, 62-year-old Michael Turner wasn't just another traveler. With a worn duffel over his shoulder and a limp in his step, he looked like any man going about his business. What the people around him didn't know, what he never told anyone, was that Michael had once worn the tan beret of an Army Ranger. For decades, he carried the memories of war like a shadow, the firefights, the friends who never came home, the weight of a choice that still haunted him. To most, he was invisible. To him, that was fine, until the TSA officer scanned his ID. Something changed. The questions stopped. The formal tone came in, and then, without warning, airport police approached, stood tall, and saluted. In seconds, Michael went from a man one notice to the center of a scene that froze the entire terminal. What followed was not just about respect, it was about truth, a truth buried for 20 years. One that tied Michael to the sister of a man who had died in his place. And before this day was over, that truth would change both of their lives. This is the story of what happened after a routine airport stop turned into a moment no one could forget. The automatic glass doors of the Atlanta International Airport slid open, letting in a rush of warm, humid air from the parking garage. Michael Turner stepped inside, his warm black duffel slung over one shoulder. The bag had seen better days. Like him, Michael was 62 now. His hair, once tight black curls, had given way to streaks of silver, cropped short the way he'd worn it since basic training. His frame was lean, but strong, the kind that told you he hadn't let life soften him, even after all it had thrown his way. A faint limp in his left leg was the only outward sign of the injury that had followed him home. From Iraq 20 years ago, he wasn't flying for pleasure, hadn't in years. This was a one-way ticket to El Paso, Texas. His sister had fallen ill, and there was no one else left to care for her. He'd sold his old pickup to cover the ticket and a few months' worth of expenses. Everything he owned now was in that duffel bag. The airport was loud with the sounds of rolling suitcases, laughter, and an overhead voice announcing boarding calls. Michael moved slowly, avoiding the rush of business travelers and vacationing families. His boots, plain, scuffed, clumped against the polished floor. He kept his eyes forward, but his mind was elsewhere. There had been a time when airports meant homecomings, his uni lining up in dessert camouflage, wives and husbands crying in each other's arms, kids clutching their parents' legs like they'd never let go. Those days were long gone. Now, airports just meant long lines and strangers looking past him. He reached the TSA checkpoint and joined the security queue. The young man in front of him had earbuds in, nodding to a beat Michael couldn't hear. Behind him, a mother hushed her toddler. Michael kept his place, his hands deep in the pockets of his jacket. When it was his turn, he stepped forward to the podium where a transportation security officer, a man in his 30s with a neatly trimmed beard, waited. ID and boarding. Pass, please, the officer said without looking up. Michael handed over his driver's license and the printed boarding pass. The officer glanced at the license, then back in Michael's face, his expression unreadable. He ran the ID under the scanner, and a faint beep followed. The officer's eyes lingered on the name, Michael A. Turner. He glanced again at Michael, a quick scan from the silver hair to the boots. Then his demeanor shifted, almost imperceptibly. His shoulders straightened. His voice lost its bored tone. "One moment, sir," he said, his voice suddenly formal. He turned and spoke quietly to another TSA agent, who glanced over at Michael before hurrying away. Michael frowned. Here we go again, he thought. He'd been pulled aside for random checks more times than he could count. Traveling while black often came with that silent suspicion, but something about the way the officer was looking at him now felt different, not suspicion. Something else. Another man approached, older, stockier, with salt-tan pepper hair and a badge clipped to his belt. He studied Michael's ID for a long moment, then looked him in the eye. "Sir," he said quietly, "could you step over here with me for a moment?" Michael hesitated. "Is there a problem?" The man shook his head slightly. "Not a problem. Just give us a minute." Michael followed him to a quieter corner of the checkpoint. He noticed the officer glance toward the airport police officers nearby, nodding subtly. They began walking over. Michael's chest tightened. "Mind telling me what's going on?" The man's expression softened, almost apologetic. Mr. Turner, you served in the 75th Ranger Regiment, didn't you? Michael froze. How do? You, the man smiled faintly. We ran your ID through the system. Your service record popped up. Silver Star, 2 bronze stars, Purple Heart. He paused, his voice lowering, and Fallujah. The noise of the airport seemed to fade. Memories he had buried deep began to stir, the heat of the desert, the chaos of battle, the brothers he had lost. Michael swallowed hard. Yeah, that was a long time ago. The 2 airport police officers reached them, to Michael's surprise. They didn't ask questions or search his bag. Instead, they stood at attention. Then, in perfect unison, they raised their right hands in a slow, deliberate salute. Michael's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he just stood there, unsure how to respond. The years had been filled with too many cold shoulders, too many people who looked right past the medals he'd earned. He straightened his back, the way he had on countless parade grounds, and returned the salute. The older TSA officer's voice was quiet, but firm. Sir, with all due respect, it's an honor to meet you. Michael didn't know what to say. Part of him wanted to walk away before the emotions rose to high, but another part, the part that had carried the weight of service without thanks for so long, felt something loosen in his chest. The line of passengers behind him had gone silent, watching the scene. A little boy at the rope line whispered to his mother, "Is he a hero?" Michael turned toward the boy and managed a small smile. "I just did my duty, son." But inside, he felt the first flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Respect. And that was only the beginning. Michael lowered his hand slowly after returning the salute. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in the line behind him. He'd been invisible for years. Now, suddenly, he was the center of attention. The older TSA officer, still holding Michael's ID, said quietly, "Sir, could you wait here a moment? There's someone I think would like to meet you." Michael's instinct was to say no. Crowds made him uneasy, public praise even more so. It wasn't humility. It was the lingering discomfort of being put on display. In the service, respect was shown in private, in the quiet nod between brothers before a mission, in the shared silence after making it home. But something in the man's tone kept him rooted. The officer stepped away, speaking into his radio. Michael shifted on his feet, scanning the room. Passengers whispered among themselves, and a few even lifted their phones. He hated that, being filmed, being turned into content. He kept his eyes fixed on a neutral spot ahead, forcing his breathing to stay steady. The younger TSA officer returned, eyes bright. "Sir, it's an honor. My dad served in Desert Storm. He always spoke about the Rangers like they were different, built from something stronger." Michael gave a short nod. "Your dad was in the fight too. Don't forget that." The kid's smile widened. "Yes, sir." A minute later, a woman in an airport security blazer approached. She was tall, confident, with the kind of authority you didn't need to announce. She carried herself like she knew exactly where she was going and why. "Mr. Turner," she asked. Double quotes, "Yes. I'm Captain Renee Jacobs, Airport Police. I was told you served in the 75th, 2nd Battalion. Back in '04. Michael studied her. "That's right." Her expression softened. "My brother, Staff Sergeant Andre Jacobs, was in your unit, Iraq. He didn't come home." Michael's stomach clenched. Faces flashed in his mind. Dusty, sweat-streaked. Too many of them gone. "Jacobs," he repeated, the name digging into him like shrapnel. "Tall, always carried an M4 with the red tape on the stock." "That's him." Michael closed his eyes for a moment. "Your brother saved my life." Her breath caught. "What?" "Fallujah. We were clearing a street. I didn't see the insurgent in the doorway. Andre did. Pulled me down just before the blast. He took the hit in my place." Michael's voice was steady, but inside, the memory tore him open. "We got him out." But Captain Jacobs' eyes glistened. "I never knew the details. They just told us he died in combat. You're the first person who's ever told me what happened." Michael nodded. "Your brother was a good man. Brave. Funny, too. He used to hum gospel songs during patrols. Drove everyone crazy, but we loved it. He deserved better than what he got." The captain took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders. "Thank you for telling me." She paused, then said quietly, "I think people here should know who you are." Michael bristled. "Ma'am, I'm not here for attention. I know," she said, but sometimes respect needs to be seen. Before he could reply, she turned to the two officers still standing at attention. "Gentlemen, form up." They stepped forward, flanking Michael on either side. Then Captain Jacobs addressed the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man is Sergeant First Class Michael Turner, United States Army Ranger, Silver Star recipient and hero of the Battle of Fallujah. He served our country with honor and sacrifice most of us can't imagine." Michael wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. His chest tightened with a mix of pride and discomfort. But then he noticed something. The passengers weren't clapping. They were silent, standing still, many with hands over their hearts. It wasn't applause they were giving him. It was reverence. Captain Jacobs nodded to the officers. They saluted again, slow and deliberate. Then she did the same. Michael hesitated, then returned the salute, his hands steady, his posture perfect. Just as he'd been trained decades ago, the years had not dulled the muscle memory. The moment was heavy, but it wasn't the weight of shame or pain. It was the weight of something he hadn't felt in years, acknowledgement. And yet, deep inside, another feeling stirred. Guilt. Because while everyone was honoring him for what he'd done, they didn't know the whole truth. They didn't know about the nights he woke screaming. They didn't know about the men he couldn't save. They didn't know about the orders he'd followed that he wished he'd disobeyed. And now, standing in the middle of the airport with strangers saluting him, Michael felt that truth pressing against his ribs. The last time anyone had saluted him, it was at a memorial service. A long row of helmets, rifles, and boots lined up for the fallen. His unit had stood in silence, saluting the brothers they lost. Andre Jacobs' helmet was among them. The memory wouldn't let him go. He could still see Andre's sister, Renee, younger then, in a black dress, holding her mother's hand. He hadn't spoken to her that day, couldn't. Now here she was, saluting him, and he wasn't sure he deserved it. "Captain," Michael said quietly, "there's something you need to hear about your brother." Her brow furrowed. "All right." But before he could speak, the loudspeaker announced final boarding for his flight. A voice urged passengers to proceed immediately to the gate. The spell broke. People turned back to their own business. The officers stepped back, the formal moment ending. Captain Jacobs touched Michael's arm. "We'll talk before you go." Michael nodded, but his mind was already spiraling. That truth he'd been carrying for 2 decades, the one he'd never told another soul, was about to come out. And it might change everything she thought she knew about her brother's death and about him. The crowd dispersed as quickly as it had gathered. Michael was left standing near the security podium, his duffel hanging heavy on his shoulder, his heart heavier still. Captain Jacobs stayed close. Her eyes locked on him like she sensed there was more beneath the surface. "Gate C-23, the loudspeaker called again, sharper this time. Michael glanced toward the checkpoint where passengers were funneling through the metal detectors. He had maybe 10 minutes before the gate closed, but he couldn't walk away. Not now. "Captain," he said, his voice low, "if you've got a minute, I owe you the truth." Jacobs tilted her head. "You already told me. Not everything." They stepped aside into a quieter corner, away from the rolling suitcases and chatter. The background noise of the airport faded in Michael's mind as the past came rushing back. Fallujah, November 2004. Michael began. "We were clearing a street. Intel said the area was hot. Insurgents dug in. Jacobs was point man. He was good at it, fast, cautious, always looking where the rest of us didn't. That day, I wasn't on my game." Jacobs' eyes narrowed slightly. "Why? 3 nights without sleep. We'd been rotating missions with no downtime. My head wasn't in it, and I missed things I should have seen." He paused, the words coming slower now. "We were approaching a doorway when Jacobs signaled me to cover left. I didn't move fast enough. That's when the blast hit. He could still hear it, the deafening roar, the searing heat, the split second where the world turned white. When I came to, I realized he'd shoved me out of the blast radius. But, Captain, here's the part nobody told you." She stood, completely still. "Your brother was alive when we reached him, barely conscious. He was bleeding bad, shrapnel to the chest, legs gone. The medics worked on him, but we had incoming fire from 2 directions. Command said we had to pull back." Jacob swallowed hard. "You left him?" Michael's jaw tightened. "We were ordered to. The medic begged for 2 more minutes. Command said no. He looked away. shame flickering in his eyes. I followed the order. We moved out. By the time we regrouped, the position was overrun. He was gone. Her breath came sharp. I'm saying your brother didn't die instantly. He could have made it. I should have stayed. We all should have stayed. But I followed the chain of command like we were trained to. And I've lived with that choice every day since. For a long moment, she said nothing. Just stared at him. The noise of the terminal swelled back into Michael's ears. Announcements. The beep of scanners. The low murmur of travelers. Finally, Jacobs spoke. Her voice quiet, but laced with steel. You think telling me this makes it right? No, Michael said. It just makes it honest. She shook her head slowly, her jaw set. For 20 years, my family believed he died a hero. Instantly, with no suffering. Now you're telling me he died alone, waiting for help that never came. Michael's chest ached. He didn't die alone, not in spirit. Every one of us who served with him, we've carried him. And if it means anything, he made his choice knowing exactly what it meant. He pushed me clear without hesitation. He knew the risk. That's who he was. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. That doesn't make it easier. I know. They stood there in the silence between them, two people bound by the same loss, but standing on opposite sides of it. The loudspeaker called final boarding for his flight. Jacobs took a step back. Go. Your gate's closing. Michael nodded, but it felt hollow. He turned toward the checkpoint, then stopped. Captain, if you hate me for it, I understand, but I'd give anything to go back to that moment and do it differently. She didn't answer. Michael cleared security without another word. The hum of the x-ray machines and the shuffle of passengers feeling unreal. Distant as he walked down the concourse, he kept replaying her face. The shift from respect to pain, the way her shoulders stiffened when he told her the truth. He found his gate, but as he reached the counter, he heard hurried footsteps behind him. Mr. Turner. He turned. Captain Jacobs stood there, slightly out of breath. You think I don't understand following orders? She said, her voice steady now. I wear this badge. I've had to give orders I didn't like, orders that hurt people. That's part of service. My brother knew it too. Michael said nothing, letting her speak. I don't hate you, she continued, but I needed to hear the truth for him. For me, she hesitated, then added, and I think you needed to say it out loud. Michael felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, exactly, but the smallest release of a weight he'd been carrying for 2 decades. The gate agent called his name for boarding. Jacobs extended her hand. Safe travels, Sergeant Turner. He shook it firmly. Thank you, Captain. As he turned toward the jet bridge, she called after him. And Sergeant. He looked back. My brother. He'd be glad it was you who made it home. Michael swallowed hard, gave a short nod, and stepped onto the plane. This was the truth he had feared, spoken at last. But what Michael didn't know yet was that this encounter, this moment at the airport, was about to ripple far beyond him, pulling others from his past into the light, because some debts, once brought to the surface, demand to be paid. The plane's cabin smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Michael settled into his seat near the back, his duffel stowed beneath the seat in front of him. He kept his head low, eyes fixed on the tray table as passengers shuffled past. The roar of the engines was nothing like the thunder of artillery, but his mind made the connection anyway. His grip on the armrest tightened. Breathe, Mike, just breathe. He hadn't flown in years, and he didn't miss it. In the service, flights meant deployment or homecoming, both charged with their own kind of tension. Now, it just felt like being trapped out as the plane leveled out above the clouds. Michael's thoughts drifted back to Captain Jacobs. Her words, he'd be glad it was you who made it home, echoed in his head. He wasn't sure he believed her, but he wanted to. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he was back in Fallujah. The dust, the heat, the metallic taste in the air after an explosion. He saw Jacobs, Andre, grinning as they moved through a narrow alley, the red tape on his rifle stock catching the light. Michael shifted in his seat, shaking the memory away. The flight attendant paused beside him. Sir, you doing all right? Yeah, he said, his voice a little hoarse. Just thinking. She gave a polite nod and moved on. But Michael caught her glancing at his jacket. The small, faded Ranger tab sewn near the cuff seemed to draw quiet recognition. 2 hours later, the plane touched down in El Paso. The air was dry and thin, the sunlight sharp. Michael collected his duffel and made his way toward the terminal, ready to find a taxi. But just past the exit, he heard a voice, Sergeant Turner. He turned to see a man in civilian clothes, late 40s, standing near a column, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair that had gone mostly gray, but the bearing was unmistakable, military. Who's asking? Michael said cautiously. Names. Paul Mason. We served in Mosul together, 2006. Different unit, but I remember you. Michael searched his face. Mason, you were with the 1st Cav. That's right. Mason's grin was genuine. I heard you were in town. Captain Jacobs called me. Michael's eyebrows lifted. Jacobs? Renee said you might need some help getting settled. So you were visiting family. Michael exhaled slowly. My sister's sick. I'm here to take care of her. Mason nodded. I've got a truck outside. Let me give you a lift. Michael hesitated, but something in Mason's manner, the way he stood, the steady gaze, told him this was a man who'd earned trust the hard way. They drove in silence for the first few miles, the desert rolling out on either side of the highway. Finally, Mason said, Jacobs told me you were with her brother when. Yeah, Michael said quietly. She also said you told her the truth. That took guts. Michael stared out the window. Truth doesn't change what happened. No. Mason agreed, but it changes how people carry it. They reached the small house where Michael's sister lived. Mason helped him carry the duffel inside. The place smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Mike, a frail voice came from the living room. His sister, Evelyn, was thinner than he remembered, her hair streaked with white. She struggled to her feet, and Michael crossed the room in 3 strides, wrapping her in a gentle embrace. You came, she whispered. Of course I did, he said. I'm here now. Mason gave a small nod and stepped back toward the door. I'll check in on you in a few days, Turner, and welcome home, brother. Michael watched him go, the words welcome home lingering in his mind. That night, after Evelyn had gone to bed, Michael sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee, the desert night stretching wide and silent around him. He thought about all the years he'd avoided places like this, quiet, still, giving space for memories to crawl back in. His phone buzzed on the table beside him, a text from an unknown number. This is Captain Jacobs. I've been thinking about our conversation. There's something you should know. Call me when you can. Michael stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, he dialed. She answered on the first ring. Turner. Captain, I went home after the airport, she said. Told my mother what you told me. She cried. But she also said something that surprised me. She said Andre had written her a letter before that deployment. In it, he said if anything happened to him, it was because he'd chosen to protect someone else. Said he'd do it 1,000 times if it meant his brothers made it home. Michael's throat tightened. He knew. Jacob said, and maybe that's why I don't blame you, orders or not. He made his choice, and I think he'd want you to stop carrying it like a curse. Michael sat there in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the desert. Easier said than done. No, she said, but maybe telling me was your first step. They said their good nights. And Michael set the phone down. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest shift inside, as if the armor he'd been wearing for decades had a crack in it now, letting in a sliver of light. Tomorrow, he'd take his sister to her doctor's appointment. He'd start unpacking, fixing up the old place. Life would be simple, and maybe, just maybe, it could still hold meaning beyond the uniform. But Michael didn't know that before the week was out, Captain Jacobs would call again, and this time, she wouldn't be talking about the past. She'd be asking him for help. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the call came. Michael was on the porch again, sanding an old wooden chair that had belonged to his father. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the desert dirt. The phone buzzed on the porch railing. The name Captain Renee Jacobs lit the screen. Captain, Michael said, answering with a cautious tone. Sergeant, she replied. I wouldn't be calling unless it was important. I need your help. Michael leaned against the railing. What's going on? She hesitated, then said, a young soldier in my precinct, Private First Class Deshaun Miller, just back from his first deployment. He's in trouble. Got into a bar fight last night. It's not the fight that worries me. It's the look in his eyes when I saw him in the holding cell. I've seen it before. You have too. Michael's stomach tightened. Combat eyes, yeah. That 1,000-yard stare. He's not talking to anyone. I thought maybe you could. Michael stared out at the empty road beyond the yard. I'm no counselor. You're a veteran, she said simply, and sometimes that's the only language they hear. An hour later, Michael was at the precinct. Jacobs met him in the lobby and led him down a short hallway to a holding cell. The young man inside sat hunched on the bench, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. His hair was cropped close, his jaw tight. A bruise was blooming on his cheekbone. Miller, Jacobs said gently, this is Sergeant Turner. He served in the Rangers. Thought you might want to talk. Miller didn't look up. Michael stepped closer, resting his hands on the bars. You just get back from deployment. A pause, then barely audible. Yeah, where? Cunard Province. Michael nodded slowly. Rough country. Another pause. You know it. Been there. Mountains cut you off from everything. Heat in the day, freezing at night. Feels like the world forgot about you. Miller's eyes flicked up for the first time. There was recognition there. The kind you only saw between people who'd been in the same kind of hell. Michael kept his voice steady. You got into it last night. Bar fight. That wasn't about the guy who bumped you, was it? Miller's jaw tightened. No. Michael waited. Finally, Miller said, we lost a guy, my best friend. I keep seeing it, over and over. Couldn't stop it. And then some drunk bumps me and I don't know. It just came out. Michael nodded. I get it. You feel like you're still over there. Like your body came home, but your head didn't. Miller's eyes glistened, but he blinked hard. How'd you know? Because I've been carrying my own ghost for 20 years, Michael said. A man who saved my life. And for a long time, I thought that meant I'd failed him. I thought I had to carry the weight alone. Truth is, you can't. It'll crush you. Miller swallowed. So what do? You talk, even when you don't want to. You find your brothers, the ones who get it, and you let them help you carry it. And you remember that coming home means you still have a mission. It's just different now. For the first time, Miller's posture eased. He looked at Michael like someone had just cracked a window in a sealed room. Jacobs, standing just behind them, gave a faint nod. 2 hours later, Miller was released with a mandatory counseling referral. Before leaving, he shook Michael's hand. Thanks, Sarge. Michael just squeezed his hand and said, stay in the fight, kid. Outside, the sun was dipping low. Jacobs walked Michael to his truck. You did more for him in 10 minutes than I've been able to do in 2 days, she said. Michael shook his head. He saved himself. I just gave him a direction to walk in. Jacobs looked at him for a long moment. You ever think maybe that's your mission now? Michael didn't answer right away. The thought was uncomfortable, like a pair of boots that didn't quite fit yet, but it stuck. The days turned into weeks. Michael settled into caring for Evelyn, fixing up the house, running errands in town. But every now and then, his phone would buzz with a message from Jacobs. Sometimes it was just a photo of Miller at the VA, smiling. Other times, it was a request. Got another young one who could use a word. Michael never said no. One crisp morning in December, Jacobs invited him to speak at a small veterans event at the community center. He almost refused, but Evelyn convinced him they need to hear from someone who's walked it. She said, and maybe you need to hear yourself say it. So he went. The room was modest, maybe 50 chairs, half filled with veterans of all ages, some in jeans, some in uniforms that had grown a little tight. Michael stood at the front, hands in his pockets, looking at faces that mirrored his own in one way or another. I'm Michael Turner, he began. I served with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I've been home for 20 years, and for most of that time, I thought I had to carry everything alone. The guilt, the memories, the names of men I couldn't save. He paused, letting the silence settle. What I've learned, and it took me far too long, is that coming home doesn't mean the mission's over. It just changes. Maybe your mission now is to be here for the next guy, to help him find his footing before he falls too far. Because the truth is, none of us makes it alone. When he stepped down, Miller was there, grinning sheepishly. Told you had a mission, Sarge. Michael clapped a hand on his shoulder. Guess so, kid. That night, back on the porch, Michael sat with a mug of coffee, the dessert stars spread wide above him. The guilt would never vanish entirely. He knew that, but it no longer felt like a chain around his neck. Maybe Jacobs was right. Maybe the way to honor Andre wasn't to drown in the weight of that day in Fallujah. Maybe it was to stand here, now, ready to reach out a hand to the next soldier lost in the dark. And maybe Just maybe, that was enough. Some stories don't end when the plane takes off or when people part ways. They keep going, quietly, in the steps we take afterward. From Michael Turner. That day at the airport wasn't just about regaining the respect he thought he'd lost. It was the beginning of something he didn't even know he needed, a new mission. His conversation with Captain Jacobs didn't erase the pain, but it showed him another way to carry it, by helping other veterans avoid getting lost in the silence. He didn't go back to being the soldier he was 20 years ago, but he found purpose in something just as important as any combat mission, reaching out, listening, and reminding every brother and sister in uniform that they are not alone. And maybe that's the greatest medal a veteran can earn. Not made of metal, but of humanity. If this story touched you, share it. There are many Michael Turners out there, walking among us, carrying stories that rarely get heard. Leave a comment. What would you have said to him in that moment at the airport? And if you want more true to life, emotional stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Here, every veteran has a voice.